Club Berry was a hostess club located deep in the heart of the downtown area. Club Berry? Club for me? Daigo-kun and I stopped by at a nearby diner to grab a quick bite to eat, then headed for the club. This is the place where President Kyoyama's paramour allegedly worked. Paramour? Is that how I say that? Neither of us were especially familiar with this sort of establishment. We went in preparing to stick out like a couple of sore thumbs, but once we were actually inside, we realized we'd been worried for nothing. The inside of the club was dimly lit, with about 10 tables scattered around. The interior wasn't too fancy either. Evidently this club was on the dingy end of the scale. Oh, got the nice music. We took our seats at a table and requested the hostess with the longest tenure. After a moment, a woman much older than me appeared, her face full of heavy makeup. Welcome! Is this your first time? Eriko put on a professional smile and promptly served us our drinks. It is. I'm told you've been with the company the longest. Eriko-san. How many years has it been? Let's see, somewhere around 8, maybe? Oh my, now here's a piece of eye candy. Love me a man with a bit of stubble. How old might you be? 23? Oh, I see. Right for the picking then. How? Ma'am? What's that supposed to mean? What is this game? She slid in close to him and ran a hand down his thigh. Whoa, what kind of game is this? You seem quite flustered, yeah, I bet. Wrong button. Apparently he wasn't used to this sort of attention. Unfortunately, I needed to use him as bait if I wanted the hostess to answer my questions. Did you know Koyama-san then? Eriko-san perked up and nodded. Sure did, rest his soul. Suicide, wasn't it? His business was doing so well, too. So I've heard, and I'm told he frequented here, too. Oh yes, he was a big fan of Emina-chan, but once she went back to her home country, he stopped coming around. Then she did go back to the Philippines after all. So much for the theory that she was Motoko-san's roommate. When did this Emina-san leave Japan? At this, Eriko-san stared at me and fell silent. Uh-oh. Is something wrong? Had I struck a nerve? I shot Daigo-kun a puzzled glance. Then Eriko-san lowered her voice. Look, you're not a cop, are you? No, I'm a bear. I shook my head, but Eriko-san's sharp gaze didn't waver. What are you people doing here exactly? Apparently, something I said made her put her guard up. I gave her a quick rundown of everything happening back at, that one.
Châtelet Romaine.
Once she decided I wasn't with the cops, her expression softened. I see. Well, Emina-chan was working illegally at the time. I see. In other words, she hadn't obtained a proper work visa. If she was caught, she would have been deported on the spot. No wonder she thought we were cops then. As I recall, Emina-chan went back home about 6 months before President Koyama died. You're sure about that? That was when she left the employee dorm, not to mention one of our employees saw her off at the airport. Oh, really? Yeah, isn't that right, Meri-chan? Eriko-san turned and called out to an innocent-looking young woman nearby. When Mary turned to look, Eriko-san waved her over. Meri-chan, these folks over here are asking about Emina-chan. Mary took a seat at the attendant station and bowed politely. Hello, I am Mary. Nice to meet you. Thick accent aside, I found I could understand her just fine. Eriko-san poured a drink for Meri-chan. Meri-chan here is from the Philippines too. She had a lot in common with Emina-chan, so they got along well. Yes, Emina was always very kind to me. She nodded with a sad smile. You must have been sad to see her go, huh? Yes. My remark had been casual at best, and yet I noticed a slight pause in her response. I glanced at Eriko-san, but evidently she'd lost interest now that Mary was the focus of the conversation, as she was busy flirting with Daigo-kun. Good luck, my man, good luck. She didn't seem particularly interested in me. That was fine. Daigo-kun was so flustered with Eriko-san hanging all over him, it was actually a little painful to watch. But he'd have to deal with it for a little longer. I heard Koyama-san had an affair with Emina-san. Is that true? Mary paused. It wasn't an awkward pause, though. I got the sense she was merely searching for the right words. President Koyama was Emina's best client. He came 2 or 3 times a week. So the relationship didn't leave the club? I am not sure. President Koyama bought for Emina many things. They spent a lot of time together. So far, Koyama sounded like any other patron. It sounded to me like she was keeping the details of the relationship vague on purpose. So, was President Koyama popular with the girls? Mary thought for a moment. President Koyama liked to spend money. Everyone wanted to be chosen by him during work, but not after work. Not the most popular guy around then. Maybe he didn't have a harem of paramours after all. Just then, I felt a tap on my arm. I glanced over to find Daigo-kun imploring me silently with his eyes. Eriko-san slung around his neck. Kai-san, I can't take much more of this. As for Eriko-san, she was eager to keep drinking with her. At this point, I was starting to feel genuinely bad for him. Well, I guess we should get going. What she said. We've got work tomorrow, real early, right? Daigo-kun nodded vigorously, piping up with a fabricated excuse of his own invention. Maybe he just wasn't cut out for clubbing. Meri-san, can we get the check? Once we finished paying our bill, I dragged a tottering Daigo-kun outside. He had a 1,000-yard stare, his cheeks covered with bright red lipstick marks. With that out of the way, on to the next one. His eyes widened in terror. Good luck, my man. We're not done yet? I just want to swing by a friend's place nearby. It's not another hostess club, is it? Nope. Oh, thank God. I felt a little guilty seeing the relief on his face. Our next destination was quite possibly going to be even more awkward for him. Why? Truth be told, I just felt like going since we were in the area. Well then, let's get going. How far is it? Excuse me. Before we could take another step, a voice called out to us from behind. We turned to find Meri-san standing there. Oh, hi. Timidly, she walked right up to me and whispered in my ear. I would like to speak with you about something. My shift is over soon, so would you wait for me somewhere? Was this about Emina? Do you know a bar called La Mer about a block down from here? Meri-san nodded. I wasn't surprised, considering La Mer was fairly infamous in these parts. I'll meet you there. Okay. Meri-san nodded and went back into Club Berry. Whatever it was she wanted to discuss, she seemed hesitant to do so around other people. Once she was gone, Daigo-kun and I headed down the bustling street. Nancy. Oh, hey, it's Kai-chan. Long time no see. How have you been, girl? What do you mean, long time no see? I was just here the other day. More unexpected music. As soon as I walked in, Mama Nancy pulled me into a big bear hug. This level of familiarity was reserved for us regulars, but to Daigo-kun it seemingly came as quite a shock. Kai-san, is this? Oh, who's the cutie? Your boyfriend? No, I brought him here as a gift for you. A what? Aw, you're so thoughtful. I'm gonna get you drunk tonight, mister. I'm good, thanks. We drank before we got here. Whoa. Don't be shy now. Come on in, you little slice of cheesecake. What? Daigo-kun smiled stiffly as Mama Nancy pulled him into a hug, then escorted us to a table in the back. As we took our seats in the booth, senior staff Ana-chan squeezed in next to us. Oh my god. Daigo-kun smiled stiffly as Mama Nancy pulled him into a hug, then escorted us to a table in the back. As we took our seats in the booth, senior staff Ana-chan squeezed in next to us. As it happens, La Mer was a drag queen bar. Ah! Let's get a better look at this. Awesome. Happy Pride Month! They didn't put on any drag shows, but Mama's magnetic charm meant she always had a full house. I used to come here all the time, back before I moved away. So, Kai-chan, did you finish your big move? Lots of customers moving this time of the year. Isn't our old pal Kamakubi-chan moving too? Sure is. I offered to help and everything, but he shot me down. Oh, that spoils sport. Ana-chan passed out a warm, damp hand towel to each of us as she spoke. Last time I was here, they threw me a little party to celebrate my getting a new apartment. Moving sucks. I'm technically all moved in, but my apartment is haunted. Well, what's wrong? Something bothering you? Across the table, Mama began to pour drinks for us, her muscular body pressed right up against Daigo-kun. In contrast, Ana-chan was on the slender side, with a flamboyant tattoo peeking out from the back of her dress. My new apartment has a bit of a dark past. What do you mean? Oh gosh, don't tell me it's haunted. Technically, the apartment next to us is haunted. Our apartment is haunted by association. Both Daigo-kun and I fell silent in unison. Actually, Daigo-kun had been quiet to begin with, considering he was wrapped up in Mama's embrace. No way. You're joking, right? Kai-chan, you moved to M City, isn't that right? Mm-hmm. M City, Maibara. Maibara? Her arm around Daigo-kun's hips, Mama furrowed her brow as though she recognized the name. Daigo-kun seemed to notice this too. Chalet Romaine Apartments. Ring a bell? I think I did good. What's this now, Dai-chan? Are you living there too? Evidently, he'd made it to nickname status in record time. Yeah, I live in the apartment above Kai-san's. I see. You know, we hear a lot of bad rumors about that place. Isn't that right, Anna? Yeah, that's where Koyama-chan kept his mistress too. Wait, you guys know about President Koyama? So he did keep his mistress there? I hadn't expected to hear that name here of all places. I took my drink and leaned forward across the table. How couldn't we? He was one of our best customers. And his little side piece worked at the Hostess Club down the street, as I recall. Oh gosh. Anna, what was her name again? Just then, the front door jingled. Welcome, welcome. Oh, if it isn't Mary-chan. Daigo-kun looked over my shoulder at the door, then lifted his hand in a slight wave. I turned to look, and sure enough, there stood Mary-san in her street clothes. She looked a lot different in a thin knit sweater and jeans compared to her work uniform. You two know each other? I waved at Mary-san as she approached, and Mama nodded. Sure do. She used to come by with her friend every now and then. I haven't seen her in quite some time. Mary-san sat down beside me in the booth. Should we make ourselves scarce then? Ana-chan seemed to sense the tension in the air as she handed Mary-san her wet towel. You two can stay. I trust you guys. You don't mind, do you, Mary-san? Any regular of this bar was bound to feel the same. The place was actually rather well suited to business conversations. Even the seating was strategically placed to minimize potential eavesdropping. This was how Mama continued to expand her network of contacts. Oh, that's right. Koyama-chan's little side piece was actually good friends with Meri-chan here. Emina-chan, wasn't it? Unsurprisingly, Mama was already up to speed. So, what did you want to talk about, Meri-san? Mama must have sensed where this conversation was headed. She bowed out of the conversation, choosing instead to whip us up some bar snacks. Meri-san took a sip of her drink and looked at me and Daigo-kun in turn. First, let me ask, why do you want to know about Emina? Come to think of it, Meri-san hadn't been there for the explanation. I decided to give her, Mama, and Ana-chan a quick general overview of all that had happened since my move-in day. Once I was finished, Meri-san paused for a moment, then began to speak. I am not sure if Emina was really that college girl's roommate or not, but I don't think she went back to the Philippines. Oh, she's still here? If she's alive, that is. Why is that? I remember I went to the airport that day, but I didn't see Emina. Huh? So how did you know she was going home to the Philippines on that particular flight? Daigo-kun looked puzzled. Well, because Emina told me. That wasn't the right question. But before I could ask, Mama beat me to it. What made you think Emina-chan wasn't on the flight then? And why did you lie and tell everyone you saw her off? That was the biggest mystery of all. Emina showed me her ticket. It had her name and flight number. But Emina was not in the lobby, and they did not call her name over the loudspeaker. In other words, her name wasn't mentioned in the final call for no-show passengers. So you figured you must have just missed her? Mary nodded. But something about it is strange. I know I arrived ahead of our agreed meeting time. I never took my eyes off the gate, and yet no one resembling Emina ever came, and Koyama-san was the one who bought the ticket for her. I wanted to ask Koyama-san about it the next time he came to the club, but then he never came back. I mean, sure, that's kinda weird, but then again, I feel like that sort of thing happens all the time. Ana-chan had a point. It wasn't unusual, but by no means the final nail in the coffin. There is another weird thing. I got a package in the mail a week after that flight. It was a book that I lent to her. That is weird. I believe Emina is still somewhere in Japan. That is why I stay at the club. I see. Mama folded her arms in contemplation. I decided to ask the question I knew was on her mind. I heard Koyama-san had his fair share of illicit affairs. Was he a ladies' man? No, but he fancied himself a bit of a sugar daddy. He'd whip out his wallet at any opportunity. Ugh, gross. Mama snickered. You can say that again. Even worse, he would target girls who needed the money. Oh, that's the worst kind, Jesus. Are you serious? He never seemed interested in Japanese girls, though. Only foreign girls who were willing to sing his praises, especially those who were sending money back home. He'd find a girl, keep her around for a while, then once he was sick of her, toss her like yesterday's trash. Speaking of trash, this man, wow. Still, it sounds like he forked out enough cash to get home with, at least. The man sounded like he'd been an awful piece of work, while he was alive. Daigo-kun stared down at his drink, grimacing. Say, Kai-chan, Koyama-chan didn't own Chalet Romaine, right? Ana-chan busily poured another round of drinks. I think it belongs to a relative of his. Why? I knew it. I'll bet that's the place. Right, Mama? Yeah, I'll bet Koyama-chan kept a mistress there. But whether or not it was Emina-chan, I can't say for sure. What makes you think so? Wouldn't most people want to move her into the same house with them? Mama laughed and gave Daigo-kun a patronizing hug. You'll understand someday when you get married. Men will go to great lengths to hide things from their wives. Don't do that, by the way. Whoa, what do you mean? Koyama-chan's wife was quite the jealous woman. To a violent degree, even. So Koyama-chan always kept his women on properties that weren't his. I see. This wife of his sounded like a rather dangerous individual. From the way she looked laid up in that hospital bed, I never would have guessed. Besides, Koyama-chan told me before. Told you what? Mama smirked. The look in her eye suggested that this was the real clincher of all. Of it all. He told me he was bribing a college girl with money and a free apartment, which leads me to believe there was some truth to the roommate thing. Oh, okay. It felt like I was digging my way to the heart of the matter, bit by bit. I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. Then the roommate was... I can't say for sure. Maybe a passionate night with Daigo-chan will jog my memory. Help yourself. Kai-san, throw me a bone here. I mean... Mama wrapped her arms around a teary-eyed Daigo-kun and planted a few enthusiastic kisses all over his face. Deja vu. I have been in this place before. Anyway, all jokes aside, it's hard to say definitely. Sorry I can't help you there. Mama looked a little guilty. I smiled and shook my head. It's not your fault. I'll keep digging around. But Kai-chan... Ana-chan took my hands and gazed at me with tearful, anxious eyes. Aren't you scared? Living there? If I were you, I wouldn't be able to stand it for even a single day. With a build like that, the average ghost would probably be more afraid of you. Oh, please, I'm not as strong as I look, you know. I'm definitely scared. So scared, in fact, I ended up spending the night at Daigo-kun's place last night. Mama pulled away from Daigo-kun completely. My god. Wait, are you two... I mean, no, but by the end of the story, probably. Because I feel like that's where we're headed. She squinted at me dubiously, but I laughed, shook my head, and waved away her suspicions. No, absolutely not. Mama turned and shot Daigo-kun a sympathetic look. Poor thing, she doesn't even see you as a man. Well, if you're ever tempted to try out for the other team, you know where to find me. Oh, pass, thanks. Whole exchange. In the end, Mama nearly dragged us into an after-party, but I insisted on taking a highly sloshed Daigo-kun home, so we hailed taxi. It had been a very fruitful evening, but I was ready to drop. Once we arrived back at Chalet Romaine, I took us straight up to apartment 301 and the two of us crawled into bed. Chapter 21? Okay. Well, the ambiance had a really quick shift here. I found myself paralyzed in the darkness. Moonlight poured in through the window, illuminating the ceiling. My eyes were the only part of me that could move. Where was I? What was I doing here? My body was frozen in place like a statue. It felt like a nightmare was threatening to rear its head at any moment. Bruh. Out of nowhere, something shook the room. Did she go back to her apartment, or what happened here? The impact shook the walls. Meanwhile, I could hear a faint sound in the distance. Oh, we might just be dreaming. The explosive banging sounded like it was coming from the right wall beside me on the bed. Eh? By contrast, the source of the other noise, the sticky noise, was somewhere on the floor a few feet away. Scared as I was, I couldn't even scream. All I could do was lie there, shaking, unable to lift a finger. The banging grew louder, as the sticky sound grew closer. Then I realized. It sounded like something was crawling along the floor. Something wet. crawling on all fours. Well, it's time to get up and fight the ghost in your living room. Come on, let's go. Let's do it. A tiny shriek escaped my lips. I could see the wall moving out of the corner of my eye. Wait, no, it wasn't just moving. She was writhing around inside the wall, almost like she was trying to push through. I could barely groan. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't get the sounds out. It felt like something was strangling me. Then I saw it. What is going on? It's a hand! Oh, hey. What do you want? We're trying to sleep. Is it because we didn't give you the detergent? The hand broke through the wall and clawed at empty air. No. Maybe broke through wasn't the right way to describe it. An arm-shaped protrusion jutted out of the wall, all the way to the elbow, like some kind of bizarre clay sculpture. The next thing I knew, the sticky sound had transformed into a dragging sound. Yet still, I was powerless to move. All I could do was look in the direction of the sound, directly to my right. The door to the next room came into view. Then I remembered I was in Daigo-kun's apartment. An icy chill shot down my spine. The door slid open. Beyond it, darkness. Eek! The same instant, something touched my shoulder. I looked over to find the clay sculpture reaching out from the wall. Well, bite it! That'll teach it! Bite it! Its fingers dug into my skin. Bite it! Bite it, it won't do that again. Bite it! See, look, the ghost is not gonna expect you just to suddenly bite it out of nowhere. It's gonna whip back like, hey, that's not what's supposed to happen. Hey, I don't like you anymore. Meanwhile, whatever had opened the door was now headed my way. I could see a dark shadow crawling its way up the bed. What it was, I couldn't say. But the tendrils of darkness wriggled their way closer. Stop. Stay back. I choked out the words in a tiny, useless whimper. Meanwhile, the clay hand clamped down tighter and tighter, hurting me, breaking me. The cluster of shadows slowly moved on top of me, crushing me, freezing me. The darkness pressed against my belly, pulsing as though it were alive. It throbbed hard as if to say, "This is where I stay." Then the real nightmare began. Ah! It's digging inside. What? What? Huh? The shadow began to press hard against my stomach like it was trying to burrow its way inside of me. Bite it! I don't know. What is happening? Cold, crushing pain flared up from deep inside of me, shooting from my pelvis to my spine, crushing my abdomen. A primal fear enveloped me. It's taking over! That fear far outranked any shadowy phantasm. Instantly, my voice broke free of its constraints. Ah! With that, the pressure on my stomach vanished, along with the pain in my shoulder. The shadow skittered away, and the next thing I knew, I was blinded by a bright light. Kai-san! Kai-san! I could hear someone calling my name, but I couldn't answer. My limbs finally freed. I buried my face in my hands, and felt someone pull me into their arms. Kai-san, are you okay? Kai-san! Stop shouting! My head hurts. My ears were ringing. Someone leaned over me, shielding me from the bright light. I slowly opened my eyes to find Daigo-kun looking back. Kai-san. Thank God. Relieved, Daigo-kun leaned back. Then the fluorescent lighting blinded me again, and I squeezed my eyes shut. You okay? Can you sit up? Daigo-kun helped me into a sitting position. He still smelled faintly of alcohol. The clay sculpture was gone, as was the shadow that had been crushing my stomach. Relieved, I looked around the bedroom and saw beige curtains. I realized I was lying on a steel pipe bed. Daigo-kun. What's up? Rubbing his eyes, he looked around the room, seemingly confused. Then he froze. Evidently, he'd noticed it too. Where are we? No answer. What is happening? Instead, Daigo-kun got up and flung open the door to the next room. A familiar-looking sofa. A work desk. A pile of broken-down cardboard boxes in the corner. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't Daigo's apartment. Looks like 201, I'd say. Huh? What? His voice was tense. I was sure we'd gone to 301 after we got home from La Mer. I distinctively remembered Daigo-kun pulling out his key and unlocking the door. There was simply no way we could have come in here by mistake. And yet, here we were, in 201. Hesitantly, I scanned the wall and stopped. It's bigger than it was yesterday. What is? That... I pointed at the wall. The stain was larger than I remembered. I guess it's kind of shaped like a person if you, like, flip it upside down and have a look at it that way. The bed was shaking. No, it was me. I was shaking. I heaved myself to my feet, knees quaking, and walked over to the pile of cardboard boxes. I grabbed one, then grabbed my packing tape and returned to the bedroom. Then I began to tape the cardboard over every inch of the bedroom wall like a woman crazed. As for Daigo-kun, he helped me in the task, all without a word. I needed to hide the wall. I needed to make sure that hand couldn't reach out at me anymore. Bite it! Look, if a hand suddenly reached out of the wall and tried to grab me, I would bite it. That's what you get. Once we'd covered the whole wall, we grabbed my computer and headed upstairs to 301 before sunrise. I mean, they did say they were drinking, so it's still entirely possible that they just went in there by mistake, but I don't know. Is a bit weird. It was the dawn of the 4th day. When I awoke, the sun was already high in the sky, but I was relieved to find that I'd actually woken up in apartment 301 this time. I got out of bed and quietly stepped into the living room. It was dark, with faint rays of sunlight streaming in through the gaps in the curtains. As I gently opened the curtains, the morning light made me squint. I looked out across the balcony at the empty lot next door. Hopefully, Daigo-kun hadn't minded me crashing here another night. I wasn't his girlfriend, or even his friend, just a stranger. Just a neighbor with whom he'd happened to share a wall. I turned and looked behind me. There, I could see the hallway leading to the front door, as well as the door to the other room. Evidently, Daigo-kun wasn't awake yet. Careful not to make a sound, I tiptoed down the hall to the bathroom. The layout was exactly the same as mine. The sink was of modest size, with a nice big mirror and a little handheld shower nozzle. I stared at my pale, haggard reflection. It had only been 4 days, and yet I felt like I'd aged 40 years. I was still wearing the same clothes I'd worn to the club yesterday. Could it have all been just a dream? Maybe I just wanted to believe that it was. I gingerly squeezed my shoulder. Gasp! A slight pain shot through my arm. I pulled down my collar to find a big red bruise waiting for me. It wasn't a dream. Hesitantly, I touched my stomach over my shirt. It didn't hurt, but something didn't sit right with me. I lifted my shirt up, and sure enough, I could see that the skin was faintly flushed. Shoulder and stomach. Somehow these marks felt completely separate from one another. Something deep down was telling me that perhaps there wasn't just one curse in 202. I washed my face, and right as I'd grabbed my keys to go pick up a change of clothes, Daigo-kun popped out of the study. He didn't look well rested. Rubbing his puffy eyes, he stepped into the kitchen. Did you sleep okay? Yeah, I think so. I wasn't sure I'd slept so much as passed out. There was a certain sluggishness in my body that suggested no rest had been had. I was in no position to complain, however. Sorry for imposing on you again. Don't be, it's no problem. Say, Kai-san, where do your parents live? Out in the Sanin area. Sanin. That's over in the Chugoku region, right? That's pretty far. Even if they were closer, they were in no position to help me. After all, no one had lived in that house for years now. What about your sister? Where does she live? The next town over. I'm guessing there's a reason you guys don't live together. Oh, there was a reason, alright. Shoko lived in a tiny studio that was nowhere near big enough for 2 people. Worse, she was so busy that she rarely had time to clean the place. Whenever it grew to be nigh uninhabitable, she would typically just crash at her boyfriend's for a while. Just then, I realized something. All this time, I'd never thought to ask Daigo-kun if there was a lady in his life. That reminds me. Daigo-kun, are you seeing anyone? Nope. His reply was perfectly matter-of-fact. Moments later, I heard the kettle begin to whine. I don't really have the chance to be social, so... Really? Daigo-kun walked out of the kitchen, holding a mug of coffee. He offered it to me, and I took it. As it happens, there are no women in my research lab. Granted, there aren't a whole lot of female science majors in general, I guess. I see. What is your major, anyway? Theoretical physics. Wow, I'm not sure I know what that is. No worries, it doesn't have a lot of real-world applications, anyway. We had officially known each other for 4 days. I wasn't exactly looking to date him myself, but there was plenty I didn't know about him. And I imagine Daigo-kun felt similarly about me. So, I see you've got your keys. Going home? Huh? Oh, yeah, that's the plan. What, you mean back to the apartment? Why? Why go back there? Unless you're gonna fight the ghost. I mean, they did bruise you. It's time to go back and bite him. He fixed me with a concerned look. Could I trouble you to walk me up there again? Sure thing. I don't mind. Girl, why are you going back? God, I'm such a baby. Rolling my eyes at myself, I downed my coffee. Go back and fight the ghost. Tell him to get out. My apartment was perfectly quiet. Unwilling to linger for even a second longer than I needed to, I threw on a fresh change of clothes and started packing. Against my better judgment, Daigo-kun had convinced me to pack a suitcase to bring it to his place. Okay. Fair enough. Once we got back to 301, I quickly tossed my stuff into his room. So, what's on the agenda for today? I thought for a moment. Well, there's a place I'd like to visit. Where's that? Hashida General Hospital. The hospital? He shot me a puzzled look as I turned on my heel and headed for the door. Yeah, I want to visit someone. Oh, but first, I need to make a phone call. I took out my cell phone and dialed Uchiyama-san's number. Meanwhile, we headed down the stairs, and by the time we got to the parking lot, Uchiyama-san had picked up. Hi, it's me, Shoko's sister. Hello again, Uchiyama speaking. As with before, his voice was a little muffled, though this time I could sense a bit of hesitation too. Just a moment, I need to step outside. Sorry to bother you. Was this a bad time? No, it's just... we're holding a meeting about the candlelight vigil. Candlelight vigil? First the funeral Shoko went to, and now this? Was it just that time of year? Okay. Sorry about that. I'm outside now, so what do you need? Well, last time we spoke, you mentioned someone was going to investigate one of the apartments here, right? I was wondering if you could introduce us. Maybe they'd have some new leads for me. That was my hope in asking. But Uchiyama-san's next words caught me entirely off guard. Oh, about that. The cops found his body. Found a body? What? Yeah. The candlelight vigil tonight is for him. So the dude that was gonna come investigate the apartments is dead. What? Okay, I take it back. Maybe there really is a curse. I mean, if all the people associated with it who are trying to investigate end up dead, that sounds like a curse to me. Even after the phone call had ended, I stood there, frozen in place, staring down at my phone. Daigo-kun walked up beside me. What's wrong? Huh? How would I go about explaining it? The journalist to whom Takahashi-san was going to sell her spare key had turned up dead. Whether it was directly connected to apartment 202, I couldn't say. Nevertheless, I had a distinctly bad feeling about it. Still, I couldn't figure out what my gut was trying to tell me. In the car on the way to Hashida General Hospital, I told Daigo-kun about Uchiyama-san and the conversation I'd had with him. As he listened, he folded his arms in contemplation. That journo's death probably isn't related to 202, right? Well, I don't think so. As far as I knew, there were only 2 deaths directly related to 202. The college girl who had lived there, and President Koyama himself, after supposedly letting his lover live there. Allegedly, the woman in question had gone back to her home country, but there was no proof, and Miss Koyama was in the hospital. No one else had lived in 202 since. And as for the neighboring apartments, no one had died as a result of the ghostly attacks. Thus, it didn't seem likely that 202 could get someone killed at this point in time. You sure about that? You sure about that? When we arrived at the hospital, we decided to first pay a visit to Daigo-kun's sister. Unlike the other specialized departments, the psych ward didn't seem terribly strict about visitors. Patients were given their own private rooms, which looked to be much closer together than those in the internal medicine ward. Ooh, she does look really bad. Ugh. I followed Daigo-kun into a room near the stairs. There, I found a woman laying in bed asleep, her countenance gaunt and pale. Her lips were dry and chapped, her hair shaggy and unkempt. It pained me to look at her, reduced to skin and bones, tubes sticking out of her arms. Still, I could tell from her facial structure that she must have been quite the looker when she was healthy. She sleeps a lot, more than usual lately. As he spoke, he picked up a hamper of dirty laundry. Sorry, one sec. I gotta toss this in the washing machine. Then I gotta tell the nurses so they know to pick it up when it's done. I'll just be a minute. Oh, sure. Left to twiddle my thumbs until he returned, I decided to pass the time by staring out the window at the scenery. Though the third-floor psych ward was more relaxed than the rest of the hospital, its architecture was much the same, with fixed windows that couldn't be opened. For some reason, that detail alone left me feeling strangely suffocated. The room wasn't particularly spacious, but it was far from claustrophobic either. And yet, for some reason, I felt far too intimidated to be in here alone. Technically, I'm not alone, though. As I mumbled to myself, I glanced awkwardly at Daigo-kun's sister, Noriko-san. There, I let out a tiny shriek, and for good reason. Oh god, what now? Oh, ooh, she opened her eyes! Noriko-san was supposed to be asleep, and yet her eyes were wide open. And she was looking directly at me. Hi, Daigo-kun will be here shortly. I wasn't sure if she was listening, but I figured I owed her an explanation regardless, even an awkward one. Noriko-san's lips twitched. I'm sorry? Do you need something? Should I go fetch Daigo-kun for you? I moved in a bit closer and leaned in. What? I still couldn't quite make out what she was asking. Maybe my only option was simply to wait for Daigo-kun to get back. But just as I'd straightened up once more, I suddenly heard her loud and clear. What are you doing here? Huh? Her eyes were wide, with fear. What? Sorry? I'm a friend of Daigo-kun's, and right now, I'm living in your old apartment, 201. I don't know if we should mention that. Yeah, we shouldn't have mentioned that. No! An ear-piercing shriek echoes off the walls. What's your problem? Girl, you know what her problem is? Confused, I staggered backwards and collapsed to the floor, but Noriko-san kept screaming and screaming. Before long, I heard panicked footsteps approach, and moments later, Daigo-kun dashed into the room. Noriko? What's wrong, sis? He hurried over to Noriko's side as she wailed. Then he looked at me sitting on the floor. He shot me a questioning look, but I could only shake my head and shrug. I didn't have the first clue what was wrong. Then I heard more panicked footsteps, and a group of doctors and nurses flooded the room at once. What the hell happened in here? I didn't have an answer for him. I stared blankly as the nurses administered a sedative, and Noriko-san went back to sleep once more. What on earth set her off, then? After we were ordered out of the room, we stopped by the Hanging Garden Terrace. I mean, we mentioned her haunted apartment, so... I honestly don't know. Did she say anything? She asked me, "What are you doing here?" What? That's what she said, word for word. What had I looked like to her? Did she see a fragment of her horrific past reflected in me or something? You okay? The question caught me off guard, and I paused. All I needed were 2 words. I'm okay. And yet, for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to say it. Let's move on. I forced myself not to dwell on it. With that, I got up from the bench, but just then, Daigo-kun grabbed my hand. What? Listen, you're looking a little pale. Okay, but we can't just keep sitting here forever. If you don't tell me you're okay, I'm just going to keep worrying about you. I looked down at his hand on mine, then trailed my gaze up his arm to his face. He stared back intently. With my free hand, I reached out and gently stroked his hair, then forced a smile. I'm fine, silly. Was I reassuring him? Or myself? Daigo-kun relinquished his grip on my hand, and I led the way out of the terrace. When we arrived at President Koyama's wife's room, we found that someone else had beaten us to the punch. The woman whipped her head around to look at us, evidently caught off guard by the additional visitors. She looked to be somewhere in her 40s. We hadn't expected to encounter anyone ourselves, so we hastily apologized for the interruption, and she apologized in kind for flustering us. Then we handed her the get well flowers we'd brought, and she invited us to have a seat. Mitsue. So, may I ask how you know my mother? Aha. So she's their daughter, then. That would explain why she was visiting. I hadn't considered that President Koyama might have other family, but in retrospect, I should have expected it. I wasn't sure how best to explain it. Would the truth offend her? Is this related to my dad's work somehow? Although, you don't seem to be the person I spoke to on the phone. Who? Something about the mention of a phone call gave me pause. But she gave a vague smile and shook her head. Oh, just talking to myself. So, what brings you here? Though her voice was hard, her words suggested our presence was reasonably welcome. My mother's in no state to hold a conversation, and my father's not around anymore. I'm not sure I'll be of any help to you, but since you brought these lovely flowers, I'd be happy to hear you out. That would be really great, if you would. Honestly, though, we didn't come here looking for any answers. No point in trying to interrogate a vegetable. Honestly, though, I didn't really have an explanation for why we'd come. She introduced herself as Okamoto Mitsue, and we introduced ourselves in return. The expression on her face was complicated, to say the least. So you're tenants in that complex. Now I think I understand what brings you here. I take it you've heard about it? Surely she must have, but I decided to ask, just in case. Mitsue-sen nodded slightly. I don't have all the details, but I was aware that he paid cousin Haruko to let a woman live there. By Haruko, she must have meant my landlady, Inamoto-san. I seem to remember seeing the name Haruko on the rental agreement I signed. Do you know what sort of person she was? Or what happened there? I don't know much, but... That says just, not but. Just what? Mitsue-san furrowed her brow and glanced awkwardly over at her mother. Almost as though she was worried about the older woman overhearing. Apparently my dad was crazy about her. Then he paid some college student to share the apartment with her. That way my mother wouldn't catch on. Apparently Mama Nancy was spot on. It was hard to picture Miss Koyama being much of a threat in her current state, but judging from the look on Mitsue-san's face, she must have been perfectly capable. Dad didn't come home much as it was. It only got worse and worse. Over the 3 months leading up to the scandal, Mom kept calling me, complaining that he hadn't been home. She was on the verge of losing it completely. By scandal, do you mean when the college student died? Yeah, after that incident, he left cousin Haruko's apartment altogether. President Koyama was so attached to his mistress that he didn't want to go home to his wife? In that case, where exactly did they meet up? Didn't make sense. Surely Motoko-san wouldn't have appreciated him overstaying his welcome in the apartment with them. As I pondered it, Daigo-kun piped up. Say, since you're here, I thought I'd ask you. You wouldn't happen to have a copy of the key to 202 by any chance, would you? Mitsue-san's eyes widened slightly. My father might have had one, but I'm not sure. Ever since Dad died and Mom ended up here, no one set foot in that house. Especially not Dad's room. No one's been in there since the day he passed. What? May I ask why? If that was where he'd killed himself, I certainly couldn't blame them. But still, didn't they need to organize his belongings eventually? Well, weird things happened in there. Her face was stiff with fear. Evidently, the mere memory was frightening enough. What do you mean, weird? Frankly, I wasn't sure I wanted to know. But I knew I had to ask. In response, Mitsue-san started to rub her arms as if to ward off a sudden chill. Something keeps pounding the windows. even though no one's there. And there's this voice. What sort of voice? To me, it sounds like a young woman, but I'm not sure. Goosebumps had pricked up on her arms. Clearly, she had experienced it for herself. I already offered my house key to someone and asked them to investigate. Who? Oh, someone from Misty Publishing. I think he said his name was Uchiyama-san. He called me directly. We're supposed to meet up today, as it happens. Of all the crazy coincidences. I shot Daigo-kun a look. Do you know him? I nodded slightly. Yeah, he's an acquaintance of my sister's, you could say. Obviously there was a bit more to it than that, but it wasn't a lie at least. Daigo-kun spoke up next. In that case, why don't we take the key and deliver it to him for you? I imagine we're all after the same thing anyway. Mitsue-san dug around in her pocket. She fished out the key, then stared down at it for a moment. That apartment, number 202. Apparently it's been left mostly untouched, save for the wallpaper. What? That's why Cousin Haruko can't let anyone move in there. Or so she was saying. Personally, I was more interested in what she wasn't saying. What did she have to hide? A shiver ran down my spine. Once I took the cold metal key from Mitsue-san, she handed me a small note as well. I glanced at it to find her name and address written there. Once you're done looking around, mail the key back to me, if you would. I'm not worried about theft or anything. I doubt there's anything valuable left in that house. But I encourage you not to take anything you find in there, unless you absolutely must. What do you mean? I tugged on his sleeve and shot him a look. Somehow I had a feeling I knew exactly what she meant. After that, we thanked Mitsue-san for her time and left the hospital room. Out in the lobby, I called Uchiyama-san and learned that he was at a bus stop just a block away. We drove over and picked him up, then headed for the Koyama residence. What about the night vigil? Uchiyama-san checked his watch. Already 3, huh? I gotta be back by 5. I'm serving as an usher tonight. So, about this journalist who passed away. Tips, new info, Ando's death. Ando, he wrote for our magazine full-time, and his death is actually something of an enigma. How so? Daigo-kun turned and glanced back at Uchiyama-san in the back seat. But Uchiyama-san merely shook his head, then pulled out a handkerchief and started to clean his glasses. I doubt it's related to apartment 202, but it's got the whole company in an uproar, I'll tell you that much. I see. His choice of words suggested he didn't want to go into detail. Both Daigo-kun and I seemed to sense this, and so we didn't attempt to pry further. The important thing is we got our hands on a few leads. Uchiyama-san slid his glasses back into place, then took a notebook out of his briefcase. Leads, you say? Oh yes, obtained from a questionable source, admittedly, but the information itself should be solid. Questionable how, exactly? I decided not to ask. The first one was obtained through a certain Chinese individual who deals in smuggling people into the country. Oh, okay, well, I see. 4 years ago, Koyama-shi asked him to forge passport for one Emina Sabare. Surely that had to be the same Emina I knew of. Had she gone back to the Philippines after all? Here's the catch. The hostess girl he sent home on that flight, she wasn't Emina. Wait, what? In other words, his little side piece never left the country. I see. Also... Oh god, there's more? I was impressed he'd managed to dig up so much in only a scant few hours. I was fortunate enough to get in touch with a cleaner who handled that apartment. Most of them have since left the company they worked for at the time, you see, but I spoke to a man who started his own cleaning business. And what did he say? Said it was bizarre in there. Said he could hear the sounds of footsteps and banging on the walls, even when the place was empty. Apparently, the wallpaper was all ripped up and hanging off the concrete, and ultimately all he did was replace it. Evidently, Mitsue was right. But why would the wallpaper be torn up like that? Something about it didn't sit well with me. I still have a few more questions for him, but otherwise my hands are tied until I get the chance to poke around 202 for myself. In the rearview mirror, I could see Uchiyama-san staring blankly ahead. But we had arrived at the Koyama residence. After everything we'd heard about it, it seemed to radiate a threatening aura, and for a long moment, we simply gazed at it in silence.